The message hit at 10:17 a.m., halfway through tightening down a tolerance stack on a hinge assembly that didn't care about feelings, only fit. My phone buzzed, and there it was on the lock screen like a bolt cutter through a wedding registry. Don't marry her. No punctuation, no explanation, just 3 words from Chloe Parker. Vanessa's undergrad friend with the reputation for knowing where the bones were buried and the nerve to point at the ground. I stared long enough for my coffee to go cold, long enough to feel the familiar mechanical calm slide into place. The kind of calm a man learns when a machine kicks against his hands and he either controls the moment or lets it take skin. Deposits paid, band booked, menu locked, and Vanessa already on my health insurance because it was efficient and made sense. My life ran on schedules, and nothing in a schedule prepares you for 3 words that move a wall inside your chest 6 inches to the left. I called. Chloe didn't answer. I texted, "What do you mean?" She returned 1 line. Not over text. Old Pine Park, 3 p.m. That was it. No emojis, no sorry, no softening. The kind of communication you respect even as it makes your stomach feel like you swallowed a socket set. I stood up, walked to the break room, and rinsed my cup under water that never gets hot enough. Every man in that room had that same look sooner or later in life. Jaw set, eyes not looking at anything you could touch, so nobody asked and I didn't offer. I clocked out early because if you're going to have your life split, you don't need witnesses, you need a clear line to the exit. On the drive, I kept finding my right hand tightening on the wheel, then relaxing it for no other reason than to remind myself my hands were still mine. I ran inventory of the last year with Vanessa the way I'd run a failure analysis. Late nights that supposedly belonged to vendor calls. Workouts she said helped her de-stress. The meticulous skincare routines that had sounded like hard work toward a day she wanted photographed a certain way. Nothing felt criminal until it did, and then it felt obvious, like the way a rattle becomes a diagnosis once the hood is up. Old Pine Park sits behind the library, carpeted in pine needles and old city money. A place where people walk dogs they name after authors and pretend they can't smell the creek. I got there 20 minutes early because that's what I do, even when there's nothing you can fix by being early. I sat on a cold bench with my coat zipped, the sky the color of lint, and I waited with the kind of stillness I only ever find right before a bridge comes down and everything you plan becomes air. I thought about Vanessa's laugh and the clean way she lined up her silverware, about the way she said we when she talked about furniture and I when she talked about boundaries, about how she framed doing the bachelorette early to detox and glow, how she said it with that polished discipline that made me feel safe while it moved me where she needed me to stand. I didn't feel like crying, I didn't feel like screaming. I felt like a man who had already started writing numbered steps on a legal pad in his head because the alternative was pretending this was happening to someone else. At 2:58, I stood and walked once around the loop to make sure my legs still belonged to me, then returned to the bench and watched joggers who weren't thinking about rings or signatures or the way a single photo can pull nails from a house you framed by hand. At 3:01, I saw her. Chloe, dark hoodie, hands in pockets, hair pulled back like she was headed into a storm she didn't order, but refused to walk around. "Ryan," she said, voice flat, like the word was a tool instead of a greeting. "Chloe." She didn't sit. She didn't ask how I was. She looked past me like she was giving me space to steady on my own feet. A blackbird landed on the path and hopped twice, then decided it had better places to be. I almost laughed at the stupid, perfect timing of that little bird making a choice and moving on. In that breath before any proof changes the name of your life, I decided on 3 things. I wouldn't raise my voice, I wouldn't argue with facts, and I wouldn't beg anyone to be the person I had already decided to marry. You can't negotiate with gravity. You can only respect the drop. "Show me," I said, and my voice didn't shake, and I felt something settle in my shoulders that felt like armor getting buckled by invisible hands. Chloe nodded once. No pity, no triumph, just that brutal kindness people mistake for meanness until they need it themselves. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and as the screen lit her face, I understood the message's gift, ugly as it was. The only way out of a lie is through the truth, and sometimes the truth arrives dressed like a warning. I took a breath. The day had a taste, metallic and sharp, like a cut on the tongue you keep touching because you don't believe it's there. "Let's get it done," I said, and that was the moment I knew. Not that I'd be okay, not yet, but that I'd be the one driving, even if the road was about to vanish under my feet. Chloe didn't waste time. She stopped in front of me, pulled her phone from the hoodie pocket, unlocked it with a thumb, and slid it into my hand. No preamble, no soft landing. Just the blunt delivery of a mechanic laying a cracked piston on your workbench. The screen burned bright against the gray afternoon. First shot. Vanessa, my fiancée, in a white sash glittered with bride-to-be, lipstick fresh, arms locked around the neck of a shirtless dancer in a knockoff cop hat. His hand rested bold on her hip like it had been there all night. Next swipe. Vanessa grinding on his lap, eyes closed, mouth open in a way that left no air for excuses. Next. Her lipstick smeared across his jaw, her friends circling with phones raised like paparazzi at the end of decency. The images felt cold, clinical, like evidence bags under fluorescent light. Each one carried the timestamp from 2 nights ago. The same night Vanessa claimed she and the girls had gone early, so they could detox and glow before the big day. She had said it with that polished discipline of hers, as if self-control were a virtue she'd invented. She left with him, Chloe said, flat as sheet metal. No tone, no judgment, just the weight of a hammer dropped straight. For a moment, I couldn't hear the wind in the trees or the distant bark of a dog. All I could hear was the structural snap inside my chest, quiet and permanent, like a beam giving way deep in a building. I thought back to every spreadsheet I'd built for this wedding, costs, timelines, vendor contacts. Vanessa had laughed at my over-planning and told friends it was cute. But at this moment, those spreadsheets felt like a blueprint for a house she'd already lit on fire. I stared at the last photo until the pixels blurred. My hand wanted to shake, but I locked my fingers until the knuckles whitened. Not because I was holding back rage. I've had rage before in shop floor disputes and roadside breakdowns, but because I knew if I let the tremor come, it would be begging my body to pretend this was negotiable. It wasn't. I handed the phone back. My voice came out steady. That's enough. Chloe slid it away, not looking at me. She wasn't here to revel. She wasn't here to console. She was here because someone had to put the truth in my hands before I signed away a lifetime to a liar. No theatrics? She asked, a flicker of curiosity in her tone. What's the point? I said. It's math. 2 and 2 don't equal loyalty. She studied me for a beat, like she expected me to break, then nodded once. Good, she said. Then you know what you need to do. I wanted to laugh, but it stuck in my throat. What I needed to do was leave. Not storm, not scream, not demand apologies or explanations. Just leave like a man who knows when the frame is cracked beyond welding. The park around us kept moving. Kids chasing a soccer ball, joggers clipping past, an old couple walking arm in arm. None of them knew the hinge my life had just swung on. Maybe that was the only comfort. The world doesn't stop for betrayal. Keeps turning, and you either move with it or get left standing on pine needles with nothing but a ring receipt in your pocket. I took a long breath, slow enough to feel it scrape the inside of my ribs, then exhaled. The taste of iron was still in my mouth. Thanks, I said. 2 syllables, not warm, not cold. Just acknowledgement. Chloe didn't smile. She didn't shrug. She just turned her face toward the creek and let the silence do the rest. I walked away first. Not fast, not slow. Just with the calm of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself. The decision had been made the second those photos lit up the screen. My life wasn't splitting. It had already split. And I wasn't going to waste breath on the performance of pretending otherwise. I didn't give Vanessa the theater she probably expected. The confrontation, the slammed doors, the shouting match neighbors would gossip about. Rage isn't always fire. Sometimes it's the sound of a man zipping a duffel bag in silence. That night, I walked through our condo like it was already a crime scene. Not blood and chalk outlines, but the kind of space where you know a story ended. I packed only what mattered. Laptop, passport, backup drives, 3 changes of clothes. Tools of survival, not comfort. I left behind the tux hanging in its garment bag, the his and hers mugs, the engagement photos magnet to the fridge. They stayed exactly where they were, like a museum exhibit for a life that had never actually existed. The stillness had a hum to it, a pressure in the ears. Every detail of that place. The faint citrus cleaner she liked, the row of candles she never lit, the stack of bridal magazines under the coffee table. Mocked me with how normal it all looked. Betrayal never decorates itself in black flags. It hides in throw pillows and curated playlists. I drove 2 towns over, checked into a cheap motel that smelled of bleach and cigarettes, and handed cash to the clerk who didn't care about my name. The room was nothing but a bed, a desk, and a buzzing neon light outside the window. Perfect. You don't need luxury to heal, you need distance. The first night alone, I laid everything out like evidence on trial. Phone on the desk, legal pad beside it, pen in hand. I wasn't going to argue with Vanessa, wasn't going to feed her excuses. I was going to document. That's what I knew how to do. Build records, track timelines, establish facts. I kept her number unblocked on purpose, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because every voicemail was a data point, every text another nail in the coffin. The first messages came fast. "Where are you?" Then, "I'm worried." They had that tone of innocence, as if the last 48 hours could be smoothed away with concern. I screenshotted everything, stored it on the backup drive. By midnight, the shift had started. Pleading now, "Please, Ryan, call me. We can fix this." Screenshotted. Filed. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. Calculate how much she could reveal, how much she could deny, how much of my forgiveness she could purchase with a sob. But distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in decisions. And I had decided. I would not give her my voice, only my silence. The motel walls were thin. I could hear a couple arguing 2 doors down, words muffled but tone sharp. I lay on that stiff mattress and thought how different it felt to be the one not speaking. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to negotiate, explain, or smooth edges. My only job was to watch the truth accumulate. Morning brought a dozen more texts, her panic bubbling. Then came the pivot. "This is partly your fault, you know? You're cold sometimes." The word fault burned, but I wrote it down without emotion. Because that's how it works. First they plead, then they blame. It's a script. I looked at myself in the motel bathroom mirror, fluorescent light humming above. The man looking back didn't look broken. He looked stripped down. Anger had burned off the excess, left only steel and bone. My jaw was tight, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep, but steady. I learned something in those hours that every working man eventually learns when a machine fails catastrophically. You don't rebuild from denial. You rebuild from wreckage, piece by piece, with no illusions about what cracked in the first place. So I wrote 3 rules for myself on that legal pad. No contact except documentation. No explanations, no defenses. No return. The rules weren't suggestions. They were anchors. Every time the phone buzzed, every time the urge to respond rose up, I read them again. The discipline calmed me more than whiskey ever could. By day's end, I realized something strange. I didn't feel like a man hiding. I felt like a man repositioning. When you pull out of a collapsing building, you don't call it cowardice. You call it survival. Back at the condo, the engagement photos still smiled from the fridge. I imagined them like fossils, the last impression of a life form already extinct. She would walk into that kitchen, see them, and think I'd just stormed out for air. She wouldn't understand, not yet, that I wasn't coming back. Not for a talk, not for a fight, not for closure. Silence was my closure. By the 3rd day, the motel room felt less like exile and more like command central. The desk was a battlefield. Legal pads scrawled with times, backup drives stacked like ammunition, phone face down until it buzzed again. I'd set my rules, and sticking to them made me sharper. Silence was working better than any confrontation could. But silence can also drive the guilty insane. I broke it once. Just once. She called, and instead of letting it roll to voicemail, I answered. I wanted to hear her angle, to gauge how quickly she'd sprint from denial to apology. Her voice came fast, trembling with the kind of energy people think passes for sincerity. "Ryan, it's not what it looked like." I said nothing. I was drunk. It was stupid. It was one night, that's all. Her words spilled like someone slapping duct tape over a leaking pipe. I let her go for a minute before I cut in. Flat. I saw the photos. Silence on her end. Then a sharp inhale, like she'd been slapped. Chloe's a bitch for showing you that. She's jealous. She always. Enough, I said, steel in my tone. Don't rewrite facts. She pivoted instantly. Okay, I made a mistake. But you can't just disappear. Let's talk face to face. Please, don't throw us away over one mistake. That word again, mistake. As if climbing onto another man's lap, leaving with him, then lying through your teeth afterward was an accident, like dropping a glass in the sink. I stared at the motel wall. Paint bubbled from years of steam, and wondered how many other men had listened to women beg forgiveness in these same four walls. No, I said. Then I hung up. It should have ended there. But if betrayal is a fire, silence is gasoline. The texts and voicemails multiplied. Hourly at first, then every 10 minutes, sometimes overlapping, like she was firing flares into a night sky hoping one would light me up. Ryan, I'm scared. I love you. I'll do anything. If you don't answer, I don't know what I'll do. Her voice messages grew raw, sliding between sobbing and fury. Guilt gave way to panic, panic gave way to threats. One voicemail cut sharp through the static. If you don't come back, I might do something stupid. Is that what you want? I played it twice, then set the phone down and wrote it on the pad. Word for word. Because that's the thing about threats. They're not a cry for help. They're a weapon. And I wasn't about to get hooked by her performance of despair. Every buzz of the phone was another cauterization. The part of me that still wanted to rationalize, to believe her words instead of the photos, burned away each time I logged another desperate plea. Betrayal isn't a math problem. You don't grade it on a curve. Either someone honors the vow or they don't. By day's end, I had a folder on the backup drive labeled Exhibit A, screenshots, voicemails, transcripts. If she wanted to twist the story later, fine. I had the unvarnished truth. And more than that, the discipline of documenting kept my anger clean, controlled. Every line I wrote, every file I saved was one more barrier against her manipulations. That night, rain streaked the motel window, neon light bleeding across the wet glass. I sat in the dark, phone buzzing like a trapped insect on the desk, and realized how free I felt. Not happy, happiness was gone. But free in the way a man feels when he finally cuts a chain he didn't realize was choking him. I didn't need to answer again. I didn't need to shout or demand. My silence was already louder than anything she could say. The war wasn't about truth anymore. I already had the truth. The war was about control. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't the one dancing to her music. I closed the notebook, killed the lamp, and let the phone buzz itself into exhaustion. Tomorrow, I knew it wouldn't just be Vanessa. It would be her family. Because when one liar runs out of rope, they send reinforcements. The call didn't come from Vanessa the next morning. Came from the front desk. The clerk said a woman was waiting in the lobby, asking for me by name. My gut told me before he finished the sentence. Mrs. Morgan. I almost didn't go down. But men who hide look guilty, and I wasn't guilty of a damn thing. So I straightened my shirt, walked down the narrow stairwell, and there she was, pearls, perfect hair, a beige trench coat that probably cost more than my truck. She looked like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog and into a cheap motel just to remind me I didn't belong in her world. Ryan, she said, crisp, as if she were calling me to heel. We ended up in a back hallway near the vending machines, her perfume trying to smother the smell of burnt coffee. She didn't waste time. Vanessa made a mistake, she said, her voice steady, the kind that had smoothed over charity luncheons and gala mishaps for decades. You're about to ruin her future, and yours, over one lapse in judgment. I let her words sit between us, the hum of the soda machine filling the silence. Then I said, it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Followed by lies. Her jaw tightened. She pressed forward. If you'd been warmer, more attentive, maybe none of this would have happened. She was lonely. You engineers and your spreadsheets. Sometimes women need more than numbers. The line landed like a slap meant to sting pride. I didn't flinch. She wasn't lonely when she was in that dancer's lap, I said. My voice stayed flat, almost calm. Her eyes narrowed, but she kept the mask on. You're walking away from more than Vanessa. You're walking away from us. The word hung there, heavy. That was the core of it. Marrying Vanessa wasn't just about her. It was about their dynasty, their money, their influence. They wanted me tied to their machine, a cog that wouldn't squeak as long as the family brand stayed polished. I'm not part of you, I said. Not anymore. Her perfect composure cracked, just for a second. Enough to show me she hadn't come for reconciliation. She'd come to control the narrative, to box me into shame, to remind me of the seat at their table I just forfeited. I stepped back, nodded toward the exit. This conversation's over. She stared, lips pressed thin, pearls gleaming under the cheap hallway light. You'll regret this, she said finally. Men like you always do. I walked away without answering, because regret is what you feel when you've lost something valuable. And I hadn't lost a thing worth keeping. In the parking lot, the air felt clearer. For the first time, I saw the Morgans for what they were. Not just parents covering for a daughter, but the architects of a culture that excused her every lie. Staying would have meant stepping into that system and letting it grind me down. No thanks. They thought they were defending their family. What they didn't understand was that I was defending myself. And I wasn't about to lose that fight. It didn't take long for the Morgans to switch tactics. When guilt and shame didn't work, they reached for intimidation. I spotted him in the motel lot 2 nights later, Mr. Morgan. The kind of man who kept his hair clipped military short long after his service years were gone. Shoulders squared under a tailored coat. Every step meant to remind you of who held the checkbook. He leaned against a black SUV, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting hours. Ryan, he called out, voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the cold air. I stopped, keys in my fist. Mr. Morgan. He pushed off the SUV, closing the gap with a banker's precision. Let's not dance around this. You've walked away from a very expensive commitment. Deposits, venues, florals, $32,800 to be exact. His eyes locked on mine like he was quoting scripture. You'll need to make that right. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked evenly, show me the contract with my signature on it. He blinked once, lips tightening. He wasn't used to people questioning the terms. His wealth worked like gravity in his world. Everyone bowed sooner or later. You really want to play it that way? He said. It's the only way I play, I told him. Facts, not feelings. If you've got a contract with my name, let's see it. Otherwise, take it up with your daughter. His nostrils flared. He muttered something about ungrateful and short-sighted, then climbed back into his SUV, the slam of the door echoing across the lot. The tires squealed on the way out, leaving the smell of burned rubber like a final insult. I went upstairs, logged the encounter in my notes, and slept easy, because threats without paperwork are just noise. The next morning, Vanessa herself texted, I need to see you. Please, just talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. Maybe just to prove to myself that nothing she could say would undo what I'd seen. She pulled up in her white Lexus outside the motel. I slid into the passenger seat. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup streaked but reapplied. She looked wrecked, but there was still calculation behind it, like an actress halfway through a performance. Ryan, she started, voice soft, breaking. I messed up, but we can fix this. I didn't answer. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. Look, I've been thinking. Maybe there's a way to balance it out. If you want to sleep with someone just once, I'd understand. Then we'd be even. The words landed like a punch, not because I believed them, but because they revealed everything. To her, marriage wasn't about character. It was about optics, symmetry, image management, a ledger to be balanced, not a vow to be honored. I turned my head slowly, studying her the way a man studies a cracked foundation. That's pathetic, I said, voice low but sharp enough to cut. Her face twisted, mascara smudging as anger overtook desperation. She swung her hand, smacking my shoulder, then my chest, calling me heartless, cold, ungrateful. I opened the door mid-rant, stepped out onto the asphalt, and closed it behind me without looking back. The Lexus idled for a moment, her voice muffled through the glass. Then she peeled off, tires shrieking just like her father's. I stood in the lot, breathing steady. The cold air stung my lungs, but it felt clean. She'd shown me the full architecture of her world. Blame from her mother, threats from her father, compromise disguised as corruption from her own lips. And I'd walked away from all of it. No contracts, no apologies, no deals. Some men fight to keep what's already lost. Others know when to drop the rope. I wasn't dropping it out of weakness. I was dropping it because the rope was covered in poison. By the time the ink dried on the no-contact order, I felt like I'd finally stacked a wall between myself and their chaos. My attorney, short, no nonsense, the kind of guy who didn't waste a syllable, looked over my folder of texts, voicemails, and notes and said, "You've done half my job for me." He filed the paperwork the same afternoon. Within days, the Morgans had been served. It should have ended there. But drama doesn't go quietly. It hunts for an audience. The voicemail came on a Tuesday night, rain hammering the motel window. Her voice was ragged but rehearsed. "Ryan, I'm at the bridge. I don't want to live without you. Please come. Please." I sat on the edge of the bed, phone heavy in my hand. Every instinct screamed. People who want to disappear don't announce their location. And they sure as hell don't take time to put on eyeliner before they climb a railing. But ignoring it meant leaving room for her to spin whatever narrative she wanted later. He didn't even care, so I drove. The bridge rose over black water, slick with rain and streetlight glare. I spotted her instantly. Trench coat clinging to her, hair pinned just so, makeup streaked artfully down her cheeks. She looked like a magazine spread for tragedy chic. She turned when my headlights hit, arms spread wide like she was on stage. "Ryan," she called, voice cracking just enough to echo. I walked closer, steady as a man walking a job site inspection. "You called me," I said. My tone is flat, my hands in my pockets. She clutched the rail, shaking like an actress begging for an encore. "I can't do this without you. I'll jump." I stopped 10 feet away. The rain plastered my shirt to my back, but I didn't move closer. "If you wanted to disappear," I said calm, "you wouldn't have put on mascara first." Her face flickered, rage beneath the ruin. "Why are you so heartless?" "Because you already left me," I said, voice firm even. "The night you chose to lie." She let out a sob, then lunged forward, not off the bridge, but toward me, hand flying. The slap cracked across my cheek. I didn't flinch, didn't step back. I just stood there, rain running down my face, staring steady into hers. For a second, she looked small. Not broken, not suicidal, just small. A woman who tried every lever of control she'd been taught. Guilt, shame, bargaining, threats, spectacle. And none of it worked anymore. "I'm done," I said, plain, final. Then I turned, walked back to my truck, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she was still standing there. Coat heavy with rain, makeup ruined, show unfinished. She didn't jump. Of course she didn't. By the time I reached the motel, the tension in my chest had eased. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't bargained. I hadn't given her the scene she wanted. I'd given her nothing. And sometimes nothing is the strongest answer a man can give. When the envelope came, I almost admired their nerves. A civil claim, $32,800. Itemized, venues, florals, deposits, emotional damages. The Morgans had turned their daughter's betrayal into a line-item ledger, trying to turn me from fiancé to financier of my own humiliation. My attorney chuckled when he read it. "They're bluffing," he said, tapping the claim with his pen. "But let's give them the sunlight they're asking for." The courtroom was cold marble and echo, the kind of place where lies sound smaller once spoken aloud. Vanessa sat between her parents in the front row, pearls on her mother, a steel blue tie on her father, all of them polished for the performance. Vanessa kept her chin down, hair tucked like she was a victim instead of the architect. When our case was called, the Morgan's lawyer, a tall man with a voice like a funeral dirge, spoke of heartbreak, contracts, and sullied reputations. He painted Vanessa as a girl swept up in a single night of misjudgment, a bride cruelly abandoned by a man too rigid to forgive. I let him run with it. The more elaborate the fiction, the sharper the break when reality cuts through. Then my attorney stood. He didn't posture. He didn't sermonize. He simply placed a thick binder on the desk with a deliberate thud. "Exhibit A," he said. Inside, printed texts, timestamps, voicemails transcribed line by line, her own words, in her own voice, spiraling from guilt to panic to threats. The second thud came when he set down a sworn affidavit from Marcus Bell, the dancer. Clear as day. Vanessa left the club with him, stayed the night, and bragged to friends about getting it out of her system before the big day. His statement was signed, notarized, and damning. But the coup de grace was the small evidence bag he placed last. Inside, lace underwear with Vanessa's initials stitched on the waistband, recovered from Marcus's apartment, tagged, sealed. My attorney didn't dwell on it. He simply let it sit there under the fluorescent lights, silent proof that cut sharper than any speech. The judge, a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair, leaned back in her chair and let out a sound halfway between a sigh and a scoff. "Case dismissed with prejudice," she said, voice clipped. "This courtroom is not a stage for family theatrics." The gavel cracked once. Just like that, it was over. In the marble hallway afterward, the Morgans detonated. Her mother accused her father of raising a liar. Her father barked back that she'd never been around to see it. Vanessa stood frozen, face pale, caught between them as the facade cracked in public. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just walked past, binder under my arm, letting the sound of their collapse echo off the walls. That sound, their own voices turning on each other, replaced every last what-if in my chest. By the time I stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, I wasn't carrying their weight anymore. They could keep the lies, the lawsuits, the dynasty games. None of it belonged to me. I was free. Chloe was waiting on the courthouse steps, leaning against the railing like she'd been posted there by fate. No pearls, no pretense, just jeans, a windbreaker, and the same bluntness that had started this whole detonation with 3 words. For a second, I thought about walking past her too, keeping my silence intact. But she raised a small bottle of whiskey in her hand, gave it a tilt like an unspoken question, and I found myself nodding. We didn't talk much. We sat on the hood of her car in the parking lot, sharing swigs from the bottle, watching clouds shift across the afternoon sky. She didn't press me for feelings, didn't say I told you so. That was the gift. Sometimes a man doesn't need counsel or pity. Sometimes he just needs quiet company and a drink that burns on the way down. Weeks slipped by like that, me working, rebuilding routines, her checking in without making it feel like checking in. Then one night, she told me over the phone that Vanessa had checked herself into psychiatric care after disappearing for 2 days. Her tone was steady, not fishing for reaction. And the truth was, I didn't have one. No satisfaction, no anger, no hollow victory. Just a strange weightlessness, like standing in a room after a fire where there's nothing left to save, nothing left to mourn. That was when I realized the anger was gone. It hadn't been smothered or forgiven. It had burned itself out. What remained wasn't peace exactly, but something cleaner, honesty. I was honest enough to admit what I'd survived. Honest enough to admit I didn't want her back. Honest enough to start thinking about what came next, not what had already turned to ash. Chloe said softly, "You sound lighter." "Because I am," I answered. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bare wall of my new apartment. No photos, no reminders, just space. And for the first time in months, I felt the air move through my lungs without resistance. Clear, unclaimed, mine. The fire was over, and there was nothing left to burn.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.